Welcome to NightStoryX Fear, where every whisper hides a secret and every story leaves a scar. If you dare to listen, then like, share, and subscribe before the darkness takes you. And tell us in the comments what haunts you the most. NightStoryX Fear, where fear never sleeps.
Centralia, Pennsylvania. The Pennsylvania coal region is full of dark history, but nowhere is it darker than Centralia, a ghost town consumed by an underground mine fire that has burned for over 60 decades. Liam and his documentary crew came here seeking abandoned structures and eerie visuals, not genuine terror. They parked their van miles away, navigating the cracked, steaming, and smoking asphalt of Route 61, the notorious Smoking Road. They found an old, half-collapsed miner's bathhouse, a stone structure with a single, ominous open doorway. The air was thick with sulfur and the heavy scent of burning carbon, making every breath feel shallow and desperate. Liam decided they needed a quiet, atmospheric shot inside. The moment they stepped into the bathhouse, the ambient temperature dropped sharply, despite the ground outside radiating heat. The only sound was the distant, continuous hiss of steam escaping the earth. Liam set up his camera, focusing on a row of rusted-out metal lockers. That's when his sound technician, Sarah, whispered, "I'm getting a spike, audio anomaly, a voice." Liam listened through the headphones, only hearing the hiss and their own ragged breathing. He said, "Record it." Suddenly, a low, guttural moan echoed from the darkness at the back of the room. It was not wind or machinery. It sounded like someone in deep, physical pain. Liam held his flashlight steady. "Who's there? This is private property." The moan stopped. In the silence, a new sound began. The sharp, metallic clank of a locker door slamming shut, followed by another and another, running down the line away from them. It sounded like an angry, invisible miner was changing shifts. Then, from the spot where the last locker had slammed, a figure materialized in the gloom. It was a man, short and stocky, wearing heavy, wet, coal-stained canvas and a helmet with a light that had long gone out. His skin was pale white, covered in what looked like fine soot, and his eyes were wide, staring points of intense, desperate yellow. He shuffled towards them with an unnerving, dragging gait. "You signed the book," he rasped, his voice sounding like crumbling rock. Every person who steps on the fire signs the ledger. You promised the ground your turn. Liam raised the camera, instinctively starting to film. We didn't sign anything. The figure stopped about 10 feet away. Slowly, it lifted its hands, palms out, showing deep, ragged burns that went right down to the bone. It wasn't threatening them with violence. It was pleading. "It never ends," the miner whispered, tears of black grime rolling down his cheeks. "The pact keeps us here. We dig the heat and we feed the fire, and we need a replacement." The figure lunged forward, not towards Liam, but towards the camera lens. Liam felt a rush of freezing air and heard Sarah scream as the temperature plummeted again. He scrambled backward, falling over his tripod. As he lay on the cold stone floor, he saw the miner wasn't trying to scare them. He was trying to give them the fire. The miner's yellow eyes, fixed on Liam, suddenly flickered, and a faint plume of smoke curled up from the miner's shoulder where a burn mark lay. The miner began to fade, collapsing back into the shadows and the hissing steam. But as he vanished, the sound in the headphones wasn't his moan. It was a high, thin, collective screaming coming from deep within the mine shafts beneath their feet. Liam and his crew ran, never stopping, until the sulfurous air was miles behind them. When they reviewed the footage, they found no trace of the miner, but the audio track contained exactly 3 seconds of pure, agonizing human screams, perfectly clear, followed by a sound like a single massive metallic door clanking shut forever.
Story 2: The Whispering Field, Amish Country, Pennsylvania. Location: an isolated farm road bordered by vast silent cornfields in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. Clara and her family had rented a small antique farmhouse for a quiet weekend getaway, wanting to escape the noise of Philadelphia. The house was peaceful, surrounded by endless fields of corn that stood 7 feet tall, a vast silent green ocean that made the air heavy and still. On the second night, Clara woke up to the smell of dust and dry earth. She was alone in the bed. Her husband, David, was gone. She found him standing on the back porch, staring out into the blackness of the cornfield. The moon was full, casting sharp, unnatural shadows between the rows. "David, what are you doing?" He didn't turn around. "Listen," he commanded, his voice unnervingly flat. Clara stepped beside him. She heard only the faint, distant clip-clop of a buggy on a far road. "Closer," David whispered. "The field is talking." Clara listened harder. Past the sounds of the night, she heard a sound like dry paper rubbing together. Hundreds of dry papers. It was the corn stalks, but they weren't rustling in the wind. The sound was too distinct, too localized. It was a low, sibilant whispering, coming from the deepest part of the field. It sounded like hundreds of dry, scratchy voices muttering a single repeated phrase. "What are they saying?" Clara asked, her heart beginning to pound. David finally turned, and his eyes were wide and fixed, reflecting the moonlight like glass. "They're calling the children," he said. "They're inviting the lost ones to join the harvest." Just then, a light appeared in the center of the field, a small, bobbing lantern, moving slowly between the rows. It was the kind of antique lantern carried by the local community, but it was moving erratically, too low to the ground to be held by an adult. Then, from the direction of the lantern, a child's voice called out, thin and desperate. "Mama, I'm cold. Where are you?" Clara instinctively wanted to move, but David gripped her arm, his fingers like iron. "No, don't answer. That's not a child. That's the field's lure." The child's voice called again, closer now, sounding tearful. The lantern suddenly stopped moving, and from the darkness directly beside the light, a second chilling sound emerged, a series of soft, rapid thwacks, like something heavy and round being repeatedly dropped onto soft dirt. The whispering intensified to a frenzied dry roar, sounding like 1,000 people screaming silently. David's eyes locked onto Clara's. "They say they've lost their form. They were lost in the fields generations ago, and they need a new voice, a new light." Then the unseen presence in the field began to speak, but this time it was not a child's voice. It was David's voice coming from the center of the cornfield, saying the most personal phrase he used only with her. "Cabbage, I need my cabbage to come find me." The real David on the porch screamed a raw, strangled sound of pure betrayal. He released Clara and pointed a trembling finger at the lantern, which was now moving directly toward the house. As the lantern came close, they saw that the light was casting long, low shadows of something small and indistinct moving between the stalks. But the light source itself wasn't held by hands. It was tethered to the ground by thick, pulsing roots of cornstalk, dragging itself along. And the rhythmic thwacks were the sound of small, round, wet objects, possibly rotten heads, being thrown out of the shadows. Clara fled back into the house, locking every door. She didn't look back at David, who had slumped against the railing, his body rigid, his eyes fixed on the field, his own voice still calling her from the darkness, inviting her to join the harvest.
Story 3. The Black Dust Settlement, South Dakota. Location: a tiny isolated settlement near the Badlands, known locally as Black Dust. Sarah and her husband Jake bought an isolated cabin near the Badlands, intending to restore it. The nearest town was 40 miles away. The locals had warned them about the place they called Black Dust, an abandoned settlement founded by a religious sect in the 1890s, where everyone had supposedly vanished overnight. One evening, while running a generator outside, Jake found a rusted metal container buried shallowly in the dirt. Inside were hundreds of dried, brittle butterflies, perfectly preserved, their wings covered in a fine layer of black powder. That night, Sarah woke up
to the smell of ozone and sulfur. The house was cold, but when she looked outside, the night sky was not black. It was a churning, suffocating blanket of the finest, blackest dust she had ever seen, swirling violently just above the roof line. She went to wake Jake, but he wasn't in bed. She found him in the living room, standing stock still in the center of the floor, his arms crossed across his chest. "Jake?" she called out, confused. He didn't move. Then she noticed that the black dust cloud outside wasn't stationary. It was actively pouring down the chimney and through the cracks in the old window frames, coating the furniture and the floor in a thick, velvety layer. The black dust covered Jake's shoes first, then his trousers, traveling up his body with unnerving speed. "It's the offering," Jake whispered, his voice thin and hollow, completely different from his usual booming laugh. "They finally returned the offering. The soil remembers the ritual." A faint, high-pitched whirring sound began, coming from the walls and the ceiling. It sounded like thousands of tiny wings beating rapidly against dry wood. Sarah watched in terror as a small cluster of the black dust on the floor began to gather and rise, twisting into the familiar shape of a dried butterfly. Then another and another, until the entire living room was filled with hundreds of silent black butterflies circling Jake's immobile figure. They were beautiful and utterly terrifying. The black butterflies landed on Jake's face, settling onto his eyes, mouth, and neck. He made no sound, no movement. Then the butterflies began to consume the dust on his skin, rapidly cleaning the black powder off his body. But as they cleaned him, the skin beneath wasn't revealed. Instead, the skin beneath was turning the same fine, brittle black as the powder, losing all trace of human color and texture. The whirring intensified, and the floorboards began to vibrate. Jake's eyes, now completely clean of the black dust, were revealed to be solid, glossy white, like polished porcelain. He turned his head toward Sarah, and the voice that came out was a high, dry buzz, like static discharge. "The settlement has expanded. We needed the last light to go out. Join the ceremony." Sarah tried to scream, but the fine black dust coating her throat choked the sound. She realized the butterflies weren't cleaning him. They were replacing him, stitching a new skin of black dust and dried wings over his existence. She stumbled backward into the kitchen, and as she did, she knocked over the metal container. Hundreds of dried, brittle butterflies spilled on the floor, scattering among the dust. And she saw they weren't just butterflies. They were human fingers, dried and folded into the shape of wings by the black dust, awaiting their ritualistic return. Story 4. The Sentinel of the Lighthouse, Oregon Coast. Location: an isolated, decommissioned lighthouse on a rocky stretch of the Oregon coast. Mark and Jennifer were on a ghost hunting trip, armed with cameras and skepticism. They chose an ancient, isolated lighthouse, famous for a legend about a keeper who vanished after a strange weather event in the 1930s. They scaled the winding metal stairs to the lantern room at the very top. The room was cold, round, and smelled powerfully of salt, rust, and old lamp oil. It was also completely empty, save for the massive, dusty glass lens mechanism in the center. They set up their temperature sensors and recorders. Almost immediately, the temperature dropped to near freezing around the massive lens. "Did you hear that?" Jennifer whispered, pointing at the recorder. "It's picking up something low frequency, almost infrasound." Mark listened. The low, heavy thrumming sound was definitely there. It felt less like a sound and more like a physical pressure building in their chests. Suddenly, the massive lens mechanism, which should have been seized by decades of rust, began to turn, slowly and silently, emitting a terrible, drawn-out groan of metal against metal. Mark pointed his flashlight at the clockwork. The motion wasn't random. The lens was rotating down toward the center of the room. As the lens descended, they saw the reflection of the sky outside. But it wasn't the stars or the moon. The sky was an impossible, sickly yellow-green, and a pattern of jagged, repeating black lines was visible across the entire panorama. Jennifer gasped, "What is that? That's not a reflection." The heavy lens stopped rotating. It was now positioned about 3 feet off the ground, acting as a massive circular mirror to the ceiling. And in that glass ceiling, they saw the figure of a man. He was the keeper from the legend, a man in a stiff, dark uniform, standing completely upside down on the glass ceiling, staring down at them through the lens. His face was pale and drawn, and his lips were moving rapidly, but no sound reached them. The keeper slammed his palm against the glass ceiling, trying to break through. The sound was deafening, a massive thwump that shook the entire tower. The keeper's voice finally cut through the silence, coming not from the glass, but from their recorder, which suddenly broadcast a loud, panicked, high-pitched scream. "The storm isn't weather, it's the pattern." Mark looked at Jennifer. She wasn't looking at the keeper. She was staring at the wall where Mark had set up the tripod. The tripod was gone. In its place, the heavy metal stand that once held the lighthouse lamp, a massive iron 3-legged pedestal, was now moving on its own. It was shuffling toward them, propelled by some unseen, immense force. The keeper's face in the lens was no longer terrified. It was smiling, a wide, knowing, horrible smile. "I was his keeper. Now you must keep the light for him." The keeper pointed at the empty socket where the lamp had once sat. The massive 3-legged metal pedestal stopped moving and tilted, waiting for one of them to climb onto the pedestal and take the place of the missing lamp. The last thing Mark saw before they bolted down the spiraling stairs was Jennifer's face, drawn with terror, looking at the pedestal. Her eyes were no longer fixed on him, but on the massive lens, which was slowly, menacingly rotating back up toward the ceiling, sealing the exit above them.